a real privilege. This evening, as Hans explained, I'm going to talk about Henry Cotton. I'm not just going to talk about Henry Cotton the golfer, but also his wartime fundraising efforts. Also that of his fellow golfers, and they spent a lot of time during the Second World War raising money for the Red Cross and other charities. The majority of the evidence was used coming from the print media, many of whom advertised and reported upon these matches, along with Cotton's own reflections within the illustrated, sporting and dramatic news, which give new insight into these matches, the courses played upon, and to some extent life in Britain during the most devastating conflict the country had ever witnessed. There we go. Henry Cotton is perhaps a person to an audience such as this who needs very little introduction. Born in 1907, Cotton began seriously playing the game at the age of 13, and 4 years later he turned professional, firstly becoming an assistant at Fulwell, then at Rye. In 1926, still at the tender age of just 19, he became the youngest full professional in Britain when he took up a position at Langley Park Golf Club in Beckenham, Kent. Cotton's rising stardom as a competing professional grew during the 1930s, and his status as one of Britain's premier golfers was confirmed when he won the 1934 Open Championship by 5 strokes at Royal St George's. As the 1930s wore on, Cotton continued to be successful, and at Carnoustie in July 1937, he became the champion golfer for the second time. This victory brought Cotton to the fore of British and world golf. Cotton's success and flair brought him fame and fortune, and this earned him a position at the exclusive Asterisk Golf Club, a regular column within Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News, and his own line of golf clubs. Despite coming 13th at the 1939 Open Championship, which was won by Dick Burton here at St Andrews, there can be little doubt that Cotton was Britain's premier golfer when war broke out in September 1939. And his reputation is undoubtedly a significant factor in his ability to raise such significant amounts of money during the Second World War. In total, Cotton raised over £70,000 during the course of the war. This is an incredible achievement which has not been previously investigated to any extent. On screen is the only reference to Cotton's wartime fundraising within Peter Doberreiner's 1992 biography of Cotton, and this certainly doesn't demonstrate the magnitude of his achievement. Cotton's work is not the only aspect of wartime sport that has been rather overlooked by historians, as excluding work on football and cricket, there has been little research into this period, a time when large amounts of sport took place and contests took upon new parameters and a new meaning. Aside from focusing upon Cotton, there is plentiful research still to be undertaken on wartime golf, including matches played by other male and female golfers, who made up one of the largest contributors to wartime fundraising, as well as the wider impact the war had upon the sport, a gap I'm hoping to fill. When Britain began the grim test match with Germany on the 1st of September 1939, there was much debate on what would happen to professional sport. Initially, as in many aspects of British life, all sport was stopped, with particular fears of air raids causing mass murder upon the terraces. Immediately, the county cricket season was abandoned. League football, both north and south of the border, was suspended, as was tournament golf. On the day which Nazi Germany invaded Poland, Cotton was in action at the southern section of the News of the World tournament, where he finished second to Sam King, with a cumulative total of 17 under for the 2 rounds. This event looked like being Cotton's last meaningful match of the duration, and he spent the first days of the war developing his arable farm at his little Goddesden property. But when the bombs didn't fall and the period known as the Phony War began, discussions took place about the potential return of sport, with Cotton being one figure who gave his opinion on this, reported within the mass observations survey and shown on screen. There we go. Right. By mid-September, discussions about the resumption of some sport began, with the English Golf Union stating it would be welcoming a resumption of golf, believing it to be a splendid relaxation, and desired clubs and county associations to hold small competitions. By this time, Cotton had joined the Sports Committee of the Red Cross and St John fundraising appeal for the sick and the wounded. Upon this announcement, he stated a belief that golf can play an important part, and that he was ready to play any opponent anywhere, so long that, subject to the stipulations that expenses should be kept as low as possible, and that the minimum charge to the public be £0.50. Just 2 weeks later, after Cotton had made the statement, his first match took place at Royal Surrey in Richmond, and here he set himself a target of £1,000 to be raised through fundraising matches before the end of the year. His opponent in this first match was the well-renowned match play specialist Archie Compston. The match was covered in some detail in the Times, owing to a lack of other actual news during this period of the war, and explains how Cotton fell apart on the back nine. Here he entered 3 up, and with just 5 to play, he was through with just 5 to play, but he would end up losing by 1 hole. In total, the match raised £152 for the Red Cross appeal, a figure which included £0.50 donated by Cotton himself for his own admission to watch himself. The following day at Wilderness Golf Club Sevenoaks, another £135 was raised for the match between Cotton and Englishman Sam King, who had finished third at the 1939 Open. Here Cotton was condemned to his second defeat of the weekend. Results he clearly took to heart, stating after the match, "I can't concentrate, I've lost my form, and feel like cancelling all matches." Undoubtedly, the 282 he had raised from just one weekend, nearly a third of his way to his end-of-year target, encouraged him to continue. Cotton's next fundraising match took place the following weekend at Killamont, Glasgow, where he took upon James Adams of Royal Liverpool Golf Club. Adams, a true native and one of British golf's up-and-coming stars, following his runner-up finish at the 1936 and 1938 Open Championships, respectively, and he would become one of Cotton's regular partners during the war, even after his call-up to the military in 1941. The large Scottish crowd went home happy from the match, with Adams winning 2-1 and raising £401 in total. This a significant increase upon the previous weekend, owing to the post-match auction of players' balls, which alone raised 44 guineas. In the Daily Mail, Geoffrey Simpson remarked that, "I cannot recall 2 balls being sold at such a price." After this, auctions would become a regular feature of Cotton's matches, always of the golf balls, but also of other items, including rare wartime food, such as onions, which generated a significant price as the war drew on, and even one occasion a lamb, which was to go unsold, and consequently Cotton took home to become a family pet. The third weekend of golf took place on the 7th and 8th of October, and this ensured that Cotton broke the £1,000 mark, with £460 raised from the matches at Sale and North Manchester. At Sale, Cotton took on champion golfer Dick Burton, who was to become Cotton's most frequent wartime opponent. In front of a crowd of 2,000, Britain's 2 finest professionals delivered a ferocious contest, although for the 4th match running, Cotton lost. The next day, a 4-ball match in North Manchester did not change Cotton's fortunes, as now he and Compston were defeated by Burton and Adams. A first victory occurred in Cotton's 4th weekend of matches, with victory at Clyne in Swansea over Diaries by 1 hole. Although, when the following day when the two met at Cardiff Golf Club, the result was reversed. Cotton's first full month of Red Cross matches ended in Edinburgh at the Barnton course of the Royal Burgess Golfing Society, where he played 2 18-hole 4-ball matches, winning both and raising £606, a new record total for an individual match. In November, as the days became shorter, Cotton visited Parkston in Poole, where £178 was raised, and Fulwell, Twickenham. This was a match which Cotton wrote about in his illustrated sporting and dramatic news column. In this, he approached several subjects, including the match, but perhaps most interestingly, it was the comments about the plight of courses and the staff, which are potentially the most interesting, a theme seen across the country, with many courses struggling to keep going and some even lost as a consequence of the war. The match at Fulwell brought Cotton another defeat, and following the match he remarked, "As I am so often on the losing side, it is too easy to say the result doesn't matter. And I suppose it really doesn't, but it is nice to play golf and enjoy it, without worrying about the result." Such a comment was perhaps easy to make considering Cotton's form in the earlier part of the war, which saw him lose 12 out of his first 22 matches, hardly the form of Britain's finest golfer. At this point, all of Cotton's opponents had been professionals, but throughout the war he would play with and against many amateurs. The first of which match included amateurs came against the Bantley brothers, Arnold and Henry, both previous winners of the Amateur Championship at their home course of Heskett in Southport. There's actually some of these photos actually occur displayed downstairs in the exhibition. Partnered by Dick Burton, the match drew significant interest, with £625 raised and described as a golfing treat in the St Andrews Courier. Although the professionals came out on top by 6 and 5 over 36 holes. The descriptions of the match makes comments about the difference between amateur and professional play, an area worthy of further investigation. At this point, Cotton's matches had raised over £2,000 for the Red Cross. The Daily Mail believed this proved that, apart from the Red Cross angle, it shows there is still a big public willing to pay to see class golf. It explained that Cotton and Burton were the biggest draws, and this perhaps explains why these two faced each other so much during the first year of the war, as well as their ability to play matches at their own personal expense, which many of their fellow professionals were not in a position to do so on such a regular basis, owing to either personal cost or the ability to leave their businesses, many of which were dwindling as a result of the war. At the end of November, there were visits to Cambridge, then to Yorkshire, with games over a weekend at Abbeydale and Sheffield and Moortown at Leeds, where £705 were raised, yet another individual match record total. The game at Abbeydale was particularly notable, not just for the inclement Yorkshire weather, but also because of the fact that Cotton's ball was auctioned for the extraordinary total of £100. December showed no let-up in the schedule, with games at Bushy Hall and then the West Essex Club at Chingford, the scene of a rare Cotton victory by the score of 5-4. Cotton's schedule in the Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News shows that he was due to play here at St Andrews on the 10th of December 1939, although for reasons I've not been able to establish, this did not take place. Perhaps the reason for the cancellation was because Cotton got married in London the day after the match was scheduled to take place, marrying Maria Isabella Moss. Cotton had first met Toots, as she is affectionately known, while he was on tour in her native Argentina in 1930, before she moved to Europe. The wedding was only able to take place after she obtained a divorce, with the threat of being interned because of her Argentinian citizenry. The wedding was rather rushed through. Toots, always a keen golfer, would frequently accompany Cotton in his fundraise matches, and even played in some ladies' fundraising matches during the war. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it was noted within the press, who reported on the wedding, that the couple hoped to have a golfing honeymoon in Scotland. Sadly, I've not been able to find any evidence about this took place or if they played any golf. After Cotton's wedding, only one match took place before the conclusion of 1939, although it was a notable one played at Shirley Park, Croydon. In the morning, Cotton took on Compston, who won by 1 hole. In the afternoon, Cotton, partnered by world snooker champion Joe Davis, lost to Compton and billiards player Tom Newman. In the evening, the foursome joined up once again at Thurston's Leicester Square for a snooker match. Cotton was certainly no snooker player and had begun practising a month before for the match. Despite this, aided by Davis, Cotton did finish up the year on a high, with a 3-0 victory on the snooker table, and in total, the day raised more than £250. A pleasing total considering the chilly December weather. Davis, like Cotton, was a member of the Red Cross Committee and had set out with a desire to raise more money than Cotton in 1939. Although he was to finish short of this, he did make significant contributions, raising enough money for 7 new ambulances to be built through his penny fund, which began in 1941. The opening weeks of 1940 were not partial to golf, and they provided the coldest January and February for 45 years. The heavy snow and ice, which froze the Thames for 8 miles at its peak, put a temporary stop to Cotton's attempts to add to his fundraising matches, but he found other ways of keeping himself busy. On the 11th of January, he attended a lunch hosted by the Lord Mayor of London for members of the Sports Subcommittee of the Red Cross and St John Fund, where Cotton was personally thanked for the splendid assistance that he had given. Here, the extent of Cotton's fundraising became apparent when it was announced that in total, sport had raised just over £12,000 for the fund. Of this, football was the largest contributor, with £6,419, while boxing had raised £1,860. Individual golf clubs, £1,177, and Cotton and his various partners had combined to raise £5,468. This made Cotton the second largest contributor, narrowly behind professional football, which had 88 football league clubs to call upon in England alone. Unable to play his talents upon the golf course during January 1940, Cotton showed them off during a musical act, something yet again that is mentioned downstairs prior to the war, and something that, from everything I gather, Cotton did on a regular basis during the winter months. Unusually, this presented Cotton an opportunity to make money for himself, something he had given up since the commencement of hostilities. With the West End back at full swing at this time, Cotton proved a large draw in London and in other venues, including the Nottingham Empire. The Daily Mail correspondent Geoffrey Simpson, who, from his frequent remarks about Cotton appears to know him well, explained that Cotton was looking forward to the weekend, where he can draw his paycheck. He continued to explain that Cotton is not hard up, but it will be a change to collect a little something for the Cotton account, the credit side of which has remained practically stationary since the start of the war. He added that the war had cost Cotton over £200 by getting to and from his various fundraising events. But when he played for charity, he does just that, so implying that Cotton very much donated, didn't claim any expenses. In the summer of 1940, professionals asking for expense money from matches became a controversial topic, as many were not as financially sound as Cotton, and the cost of travel and leaving their businesses cost them money they just simply didn't have. Clubs were said to be frustrated when professionals asked for expenses, arguing, Cotton never charges, why should you? Cotton was able to not ask for a single money because, as previously established, his success in the 1930s had made him a wealthy man. Other professionals were not so lucky. An article in the Daily Mail explained the fortunes of some of Cotton's fellow professionals, beginning with Sam King, who, as recently in 1939, had placed at the Open Championship. He had been forced to abandon his job at Knoll Park and had to take up farming in order to make a living, while other professionals, such as Alf Padgham, was engaged in some form of civil defence. As the war drew on, nearly every professional golfer was engaged in a wartime-related capacity. This had an impact on Cotton's opponents, who, as the war drew on, became primarily from golf clubs that were hosting matches or the local proximity, rather than top professionals travelling large distances to full fixtures, as had been the case in 1939, and as we'll see in 1940. Cotton was no doubt happy to earn himself some money from his talents during this brief lull in his fundraising matches. Although his theatre performances was the only golf which he played in January 1940, with his Red Cross match due to take place at the Northenden Golf Club near Manchester on the 26th of January, was forced to be postponed owing to the weather. Cotton's schedule of fundraising matches was fully resumed in March, with a rearranged match played at Northenden, where a 4-ball match took place over 36 holes and the results were a half. Before the end of the month, there was also a visit to Prestwick, and the Times reported that in the afternoon the crowd was between 6,000 and 7,000 people, which helped to raise £270 to the course. Cotton commented that Prestwick is still a great course, even though I do not like the extreme slopes of the putting greens, adding, I should like to be able to get down 2 putts after 2 good shots without having a heart attack each time I started the ball rolling towards the hole. Personally, I've not had the pleasure to play at Prestwick, but I'm sure every club golfer can feel that sometime, particularly during this hot weather. In April, as the spring blossomed, Cotton's schedule increased, and it was almost entirely in opposition with Dick Burton, who, without doubt, was Cotton's most frequent wartime playing partner. As I've previously explained, owing to his success, was able to play without leaving his club and also at personal expense. On screen are the matches they played in early April. Here, beginning in Newcastle on the 6th of April, the two played 5 matches together in just 9 days, raising over £1,275 in the process. No small total. Perhaps the most interesting match of the year, and potentially the entire series, took place at Sandy Lodge on the 20th of April 1940, when it was not just the golfers who were in opposition, but also the balls they were using. Here, Cotton and partner Archie Compston used the gutty ball, which is remembered as the ball which, for its cheap production, helped to popularise golf in the 19th century, but which had been stopped from being used at the turn of the 20th century. Cotton and Compston's opposition were professional golfing legends, James Bray and Sandy Hurd, aged 70 and 72 respectively, who used the modern-day rubber cord ball. On paper, this match appeared to be a one-sided one, but this was evened up by the balls used. Cotton, and this was something that the press talked about quite a lot, both prior and after the match. Prior to this, Cotton claimed that he was worried about being outdriven by miles with the older ball, further illustrated by Charles Grove's preview in the Daily Mail, where he explained that 3 extra clubs were required for longer shots when using the gutty. After 18 holes, the match was halved, which in the view of the reporting from the golfing magazine present at the match was due to Cotton's impressive play, noting that into the wind he was able to reach the same distance with the gutty as the modern and superior rubber cord ball, although downwind the rubber cord was 20 or 30 yards ahead. The match was attended by over 2,000 people, but only raised £222, which disappointed Cotton, who explains post-match that Harry Varden had once told him that the game was followed more in the north than in the south, a remark which he concurred with based upon his own experiences during the war. Following this match, Cotton continued to play in the London area, firstly at Pollard's Hill, then at Temple and Maidenhead, and thirdly at Royal Mid Surrey, where he observed the final of the Daily Sketch ladies tournament between Wanda Morgan and Pam Barton taking place before taking the auction of famous players' clubs, including his own, after the conclusion of the match, which had been won by Pam Barton. Cotton was also in demand away from the course, and in April he had received an invitation from the ENSA to lecture troops in France. There is no evidence this took place, most likely owing to the real opening of the war at this time, and that the eventual British withdrawal from France in the weeks that followed. On the 4th of May, a new record total for a single cotton match was achieved at Knoll, Bristol, when a grand total of £710 was raised in front of a crowd of more than 3,000 people. And this brought the total for cotton's matches to £10,000 in less than 7 months. This figure was reached after 2 local men gave £300 at the end of the day, so that Bristol had the honour of taking cotton to the 5 figures. This left cotton just short of the £12,000 raised at this stage by the Football Association, the largest single contributor. The following day, the Wizard visits the Pipe House Municipal, Sutton Coldfield, where £350 was raised, of which £15 came from the somewhat usually on the 36th green, after the Lord Mayor of Birmingham asked spectators to subscribe £15 to the fund if cotton holds its tricky Birmingham, which he duly did, and subsequently coins rained down upon the green. This is an example of the novel ways of extra money being raised at matches, with another example shortly after at Formby, where the local councillor, John Bors, offered £10 for an eagle in the match and £1 for every birdie, and this generated an extra £45. Cotton later remarked this idea appealed to crowds everywhere, and this once generated £250 on a single occasion, and they sadly have not been able to find out exactly where that is. Further matches took place at Sunningdale, Leicester, Pollock in Glasgow and Woollerton Park, Nottingham, while the British Expeditionary Force were driven back in France. When the Dunkirk evacuation began on the 25th of May, cotton was at Beaconsfield in North London, then at Moor Park, Rickmansworth, where £500 for the Red, and in total £500 for the Red Cross was raised over the weekend. As the Phoney War ended and the conflict deepened in late spring 1940, Cotton's golf in total raised more than £20,000. Sorry, Cotton's golf in total raised more than £20,000, of which over half owed to Cotton's efforts. Prior to German Blitzkrieg, Summer Golf organisers attempted to continue almost as normal and organised tournaments for the summer of 1940. Firstly, with the news of the World Match Play taking place in Mid-Surrey. This had been rearranged from the autumn of 1939. Here, there was offered, in total, there was a purse of £1,250 in total. And then there was the Daily Mail stroke play at June at Sundridge Park, Bromley. Both competitions offered money to charity, but also a chance for the professionals to earn money for the first time since the commencement of hostilities. At the News of the World, Cotton was to be victorious, and on screen is one of my favourite pictures of Cotton of action during the war, with him playing deep in the woods, something I'm sure we can all sympathise with. At the Daily Mail, Cotton led after 2 rounds, but dropped 3 behind following the 3rd round on the final morning. And despite a comeback on the final 9 holes, he was only able to become one shot within his close friend and wartime adversary Dick Burton, who took the victory. Both during and after these matches, Cotton continued to play Red Cross matches across the country, despite the looming threat of a German invasion. The crowds also continued to be strong, with £2,000 raised for a match at Harbour in Birmingham for a late afternoon 36 holes match against Burton, being one of the best attended despite the increasingly serious position Britain found itself in at this time. The worsening of the war increased conscription, and despite his fundraising work, Cotton found himself called up to the RAF on the 8th of August 1940, becoming one of 664 professional golfers to join the armed forces throughout the duration of the conflict. The reason for this call up to the RAF potentially owes to his flying licence, although this is uncertain and something denied by Toots. Cotton was posted initially to RAF Loughborough, then to RAF Shawbury near Shrewsbury, where he was appointed catering officer and showed his love for bread and butter pudding. Billy Wright, Don Bradman and even Dick Burton, who all became physical training staff, or essentially poster boys for the armed forces. Cotton, it seems, was engaged in actual war work, or at least bread and butter pudding making. The call-up did make Cotton's Red Cross matches slightly fewer than they had in early 1940, and caused the cancellation of a fixture at Royal Blackheath in August. But Cotton continued to play when given permission. With the war a year old on the 1st of September 1940, Cotton played his 61st Red Cross match at Brill, raising another £400. In the autumn, there would be jaunts to South Hertfordshire, Glenvervie in Stirlingshire, and Leasowe in Wallasey, amongst others. His final match of 1940 took place at Alton Solihull, and in this, his column in the Illustrated Sporting and Dramatic News, he wrote about the match at length, giving insight not just into the fundraising, but also the impact the Blitz was having upon Birmingham. He began by stating this was the first time he'd visited the city since his record-breaking visit to Harbour in July. The comment upon screen is one of the few instances Cotton's give any sense of the impact the war was having upon Britain, giving some insight to the circumstances which many people found themselves in because of the result of the war. Cotton concluded by explaining that when I arrived, I found the usual enthusiastic golf crowd wanting to follow us around the course and forget their troubles. I think part of the success of Cotton's matches actually owes to this forgetting their troubles and thinking about other things that weren't, thinking about things that prior to the war, such as playing golf. At the conclusion of 1940, Cotton had now raised more than £26,000, making him the largest single contributor to the Red Cross Sport Fund, which in total amassed to £105,000. This was notably ahead of the whole of sport of football, which had raised £18,500. This, Cotton's work fundraising had come in 70 matches, which is over half the matches Cotton was to play during the course of the war. Cotton's early fundraising efforts were suspended in early 1941, owing to a stomach ulcer, and he wasn't able to play his first match of the year and his 71st in total until April. In total, Cotton would play only 17 matches in 1941, owing to illness and his work for the RAF. By this time, Cotton's playing partners were almost all members of the armed forces, including regular playing partners Dick Burton and James Adams. Call-ups, wartime duties, and the situation in Britain, and the situation in which Britain found itself during 1941, impacted the crowds, which were generally smaller, and as a consequence, the amounts raised dipped somewhat. With just £250 raised at Sherwood Forest in Mansfield, £200 raised at Church Stretton, and £100 at Grimsby, for example. There were still matches which generated large amounts of interest, such as that in July 1941 at Cathcart Castle in Scotland, with over 3,000 people reported to have attended in the press reports. In his Illustrating the Sporting and Dramatic News column, Cotton wrote at length about the passion which he felt existed for the game in Scotland, shown on screen. This 36-hole match added £400, not one of the largest amounts in the context of the entire war, but a sizable amount at this time. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule, and in 1941 this came in Sandwall at Leeds, where £3,000 came for a single match for the first time. The crowd gave Cotton the feeling of the old championship days in the air, as thousands rushed down the 36th hole after Cotton had made a birdie putt to bring the match all square after the ultimate hole. Sadly, he was to lose the 36th hole. This match took Cotton's total to over 32,000. Further matches throughout the rest of the year took the total to nearly £36,000 in Cotton's own words. Despite fewer matches and the outlook for Britain gloomy, remarkably the returns from Cotton's matches were still fairly promising. Petrol rationing forced the abandonment of a tournament proposed in Bradford in April 1942. But it did not prevent Cotton's travelling playing at the distant venues of Romford, Stoke and Peterborough in May 1942, and these brought another £1,700 to the total. Cotton did realise that the shortages and the war was having an impact, feeling that if matches within easy reach of people, I feel they would support it. On the 21st of June, Cotton's travelling got his driver for the day, William Denman, in trouble after a match at Moortown, and he was found £40 for the illegal use of petrol and failing to keep a record of the journey. The magistrate stated that Denman was lucky he didn't impose a larger penalty. This didn't stop Cotton playing, finishing the year in Newcastle, where his primary concern was the potentially bleak December weather. But after raising £300 in front of more than 3,000 spectators, he described it as a most pleasant afternoon, and a further example how of even sport, leisure and pleasure can be made to serve the country. From this point onwards, Cotton's fundraising efforts became quite limited by two health issues, one which I've mentioned previously that comes back, and another one which resulted in a second operation, and these resulted in long periods of convalescence. The first of these was a stomach ulcer, which prevented Cotton from playing any golf in early 1943, and resulted in his resignation from the RAF in April 1943. Initially, it was believed this would keep him out of action for 6 months, although Cotton resumed within just 2 months, with his first match of the year taking place on the 5th of June at St Nicholas Golf Club, Prestwood. Here, as ever, Cotton managed to attract large crowds, with yet again 3,000 people stated as the attendance. This had to raise £726. Further matches at Cuddington, Royal St Anne's and Cavendish took place before a return to Scotland to take part in the Glasgow Fair, the name given to the city's holidays at home scheme, a popular wartime move to stop unnecessary travelling in the summer holidays. Cotton played two matches in Glasgow, the first at Killamont, then at Sandy Hills, and he remarked that there were more than 3,000 people in attendance each day, and many of whom would join golf for the first time, owing to the half-a-shilling entrance. So this was significantly cheaper than the regular price of watching tournament golf, which sadly isn't stated. The Second World War is noted to be key to breaking down class barriers within many aspects of British society, and evidence such as this suggests that perhaps golf should be seen in the same way. Before the summer was out, matches took place at Loughborough, Winchester, Fulwell, and a second visit in less than a year to Romford. In October 1943, Cotton had to undergo an operation after suffering appendicitis, and such was the extent of Cotton's recuperation that he didn't play again for 9 months, until the 9th of June 1944, 3 days after the D-Day landings. This was the 108th match of his series, and played at Burley Salterton in East Devon, which he described as, "The course is one of the most prettiest of its type. A combination of down and heath. It's situated on a cliff overlooking the sea, and on that lovely, hot, airless summer afternoon, it was difficult to believe that just across the water, the war was at its grimmest." Cotton's next match took place at the Robin Hood Club in Berlin, where he played alongside the Times golf correspondent and MP for West Acton, Henry Longhurst, in a 4-ball match, in which the two were defeated by 1 hole by the club professional and a club member playing off a +1 handicap. The match proved to be an attraction, raising £2,885, making it one of the largest totals of the war, and certainly one of the most significant amounts raised since the end of the Foley War. Longhurst proved to be a worthy opponent in Cotton's next match at Royal St Anne's, which raised another £2,000. Before the match at Stourbridge on the 18th of August, Cotton once again demonstrated willingness to raise money by any means, by taking part in the putting competition at the Himley Fair, alongside Cotton's host for the week, Walker Cup player William Twiddell. The competition was a 5-shilling entry fee and was returned if either player was defeated, which neither was. On the 4th of September, a new record total for a single day was raised when £5,000 was raised at Sutton Coldfield Golf Club. Here Cotton took part in one of the two 18-hole matches played that day. Doctor's orders prevented him from playing the full 36. Cotton believed that it was the good news from Muir which helped the fundraising, remarking, "From my experience of over 120 games, it is that the war plays no small part in getting people to loosen up their purse strings. And with the end in sight, people are letting themselves go today." This came just after a week after the liberation of Paris, and as Operation Overlord was enjoying continued success on the European mainland. With the war changing, as were the fundraising costs. As in the report which followed the match at Fraserburgh, it was described that money raised was now being used to provide parcels for prisoners of war, demonstrating the change in appeal from the sick and wounded in the early part of the war. In 1945, those administering British golf were beginning to look beyond the war, with several competitions organised for the summer of 1945, including the revival of the News of the World competition, which Cotton had been victorious at in its last edition in 1940. Cotton himself began to prepare for a new life after the war, beginning with a partnership established with course designer Sir Guy Campbell to remodel and potentially design new courses. A potential early course to receive the treatment of these two men was Royal St Paul's in Kent, which had been badly damaged firstly by a flood and then military defences and training taking part upon the course. In April 1945, Cotton was photographed at the course, surveying its condition and testing out the 4 holes which were playable. The club's history records that Cotton might have helped Campbell in its post-reconstruction, but this role is far from certain. Also at this time, Cotton was appointed director professional at Coombe Hill Golf Club near Kingston upon Thames, and here he took a financial interest in the club and also became involved in its management. With the end of the war, in sight, it was announced in April 1945 that the Red Cross appeal would close on the 30th of June. Before this happened, Cotton played several more matches, such as at Duddington, Edinburgh in May 1945. Cotton's last match at the Red Cross Series took place at Coventry Golf Club on the 17th of June 1945. Here, he partnered Lieutenant W.J. Cox and played against the American golfers Captain Horton Smith and Sergeant Melvin Chuck Harbert over 36 holes. Perhaps fittingly, considering how Cotton started the war, Cotton and Cox were defeated by the American pairing. Perhaps more importantly, the game raised £1,800. This brought an end to the extraordinary wartime fundraising matches of Henry Cotton. Cotton played 121 matches during the course of the war and raised in excess of £70,000 for the Red Cross. This paper has demonstrated not only the extraordinary nature of Cotton, along with his fellow professionals and amateurs, people such as Dick Burton, James Adams, who were willing to not play just for personal gain, but for a greater cause. It has also given some insight into the wider impact of the war for golf, but also a further knowledge of the impact it had upon Britain. Questions should be asked as to why Cotton was so successful during the war. And there was a potential, and there are several potential contributing factors to this. Firstly, Cotton was a huge draw and someone who transcended his sport, and his success had lifted him to the pinnacle of British sporting celebrity, alongside figures such as Stanley Matthews, Fred Perry, and Dennis Compton, and they were these figures who all transcended their sport. Cotton was arguably Britain's best-known sportsman at this time. Secondly, the middle and upper class nature of golf and golfers who made donations, and particularly the auctions, who made the days out more lucrative. As though Cotton didn't exclusively play at Britain's most prestigious clubs, there is evidence to suggest that these matches helped to democratise the sport. But the majority of those attending were still likely to be of money, particularly compared to wartime football, which was more likely to attract a working class audience. Many of Cotton's matches also took place out of urban areas, so the nature of the war that meant these matches were a huge draw, which links in with Cotton as a figure who transcends golf. Finally, it is the golf itself. During 1940 in particular, the golf that Cotton played in these matches was against top-class opposition such as Dick Burton, James Adams and Archie Compston. And these were noted, not just by Cotton, but in the wider press, to be of the highest quality. Other sports, such as football for example, owing to guest appearances and the competitive of some matches owing to the regional nature of the sport at this time, meant that games weren't always the best quality. By comparison, Cotton and his partners went hammer and tongue on a regular basis, particularly early in the war, when the top golfers were playing almost upon a daily basis for fundraising matches. Following the war, Cotton's efforts were not to be forgotten about, and he was awarded an MBE for his efforts immediately after the war, and shortly before his death, a knighthood for his services to golf. When competitive golf resumed in the summer of 1945 with the News Chronicle Championship, here Cotton demonstrated his quality and undoubtedly the practice he had, and duly he won the event. His victory at the 1948 Open Championship confirmed his status as one of Britain's greatest golfers. Perhaps his greatest achievement should be seen as an extraordinary wartime fundraising effort. Thank you.